Hello, everyone. How do you write hateable villains? Villains that you detest, that you just want to see die in a really horrible manner? Well, I think that there are two different ways that I can think of. Although I want to say first that a villain doesn't necessarily have to be hateable in order to be a good villain. Sometimes a villain can be sympathetic. Sometimes you can understand a villain's motivations, even though their actions aren't justified. So, for example, you could have a character who, let's say, is discriminated against in society somehow. They're oppressed, but then they use violent means in order to overcome their oppression. In a case like that, you can sympathize with the villain even if you disagree with their actions. An example of a character like that might be the Phantom of the Opera or someone like that. Um, but I do think that there are so I don't think a villain has to be really hateable in order to be a good villain. Or sometimes you have a villain who just they like a Bond villain or something that they revel in their villainy, and you love to hate them, so to speak. Um, they are what you might call charismatic villains, and they're in a category all by themselves. But if you want to write a really hateable villain, I would say that there are two different ways that I can think of that are very effective. Um, One way is I've often noticed that the most hateable villains in books and movies tend to be people who you could run into in everyday life. They tend to be people who remind us of people who we've actually met in real life. Like, for example, why is it that a lot of people tend to hate the character of Dolores Umbridge from Harry Potter more than Voldemort? Well, she's certainly not more dangerous than Voldemort. She hasn't killed nearly as many people as Voldemort. But at the same time, people hate her more. Well, why? It's because she reminds them of people that they've known in real life. I think we've all had a teacher that's somewhat like Dolores Umbridge, a condescending person who hides behind governmental authority in order to protect their power and is a total hypocrite. I think we've all known people like that, and therefore we hate Dolores Umbridge because she reminds us of um, of bitter and oppressive and tyrannical teachers that we've actually had. And at the same time, another character that people hate a lot in film is the mayor from Jaws, who of course wanted to keep the beaches open even though people were dying. Well, we've all known either personally or on television corrupt politicians, bureaucrats, people who are worried more about their reputation than the safety of the public, and therefore, when we see characters like that uh, um, in a movie or read about them in a book, we can become quite irate because they remind us of people that we've actually known. Supervillains and people like that tend to not, or people with magical powers, or people with very, let's say, flamboyant personalities, villains like that, tend to not, or even just your average killer or murderer, we tend to not hate them quite as much because we don't run into people like that every day. In some cases, they exist, but we don't have to deal with them every day. Whereas people like the mayor, people like Dolores Umbridge, we often run into people like that, and so I think that's why we hate them so much. And then another way I think to create a really hateable villain is to write characters who hurt the hero or the main character in a really significant and detestable way. Sometimes I think the reason why we don't root for heroes enough in stories is because the villain is not threatening enough, and therefore the hero hasn't earned our sympathy, so to speak. And so, like for example, I think one way to make a villain really hateable is if they kill the hero's wife, they kill their children, they kill people really close to them, they kill, or in some cases they may kill the hero, they kill people that we really care about, and that and that we're close to in the story. And when that happens, we think, okay, this guy needs to die right now. He's killed enough people. We want to see this guy get what he deserves. And so a character like that might be Joffrey from Game of Thrones, or you might have the character, the British officer in The Patriot. Uh, uh, people who have villains who have done so much damage that it's very satisfying when we finally see their end. And so, I think that's another way to write a hateable character is that, uh, villains who harm the hero in a really significant way, we want to see them pay and get what they deserve. And so I think those are just a couple of ways you can create, hateable villains.